Congrats on the movie. It was a really fun watch. And I was trying to do some research on this. This started as an original idea, correct? And then it kind of morphed into being Ultraman once Netflix got on board.
Yeah, it had been something I'd been carrying around since, believe it or not, 2001. It was an idea I had inspired by Ultraman. And I never even considered that it would be an Ultraman project just because I knew there was probably not a chance I could get the rights, and the rights were there were all kinds of difficulties with it. But I developed it actually at Sony, started working on it there, developed it there for a while. And we just got to a point where they wanted to go one direction, I wanted to go another with the film. But Christine Belson over at Sony was really gracious and allowed me to take the film out. And I was at Netflix probably just a couple of weeks after it went into turnaround at Sony. And when I came into the room there was a huge group of people. I thought it was just going to be a couple folks, but it was Melissa Cobb, Greg Taylor, and a few other folks. And the suggestion was, hey, what if we could get you the rights to Ultraman? So I was like, that sounds amazing. So then I took the script that existed and started to, it's still the same, very much the same story, same characters, but start to work the Ultraman mythology into the film.
Yeah, that's that's such an incredible story to be inspired from it, and then later on actually get to build upon that franchise. And I was curious, what is kind of your history with Ultraman, since it did inspire the original idea?
So I first came across the show when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, and my dad would and I would watch it on Sunday afternoons. And I remember seeing the character for the first time, and I was already a big comic book fan at this point, but Ultraman was so different, not just in his appearance, but in his powers, than any of the other characters that I'd grown up with to that point. I was immediately engaged. You see the science team and the bright orange uniforms and Ultraman in his red and silver. It's not a suit. He's an alien, so it's his body. But I just was obsessed with it when I was a kid, but I had no connection. I didn't know how big the character was in the rest of the world. I didn't know anything about it. And then, um, as things do when you're a kid, you're interested and then you move on to other things. But when I moved to Los Angeles in the 90s, then I was re-exposed to it. And at that time, Ultraman Tiga was the show that I had seen. And then I really started to become obsessed with the character again. And that's when the idea started to form.
And I was curious, like the tokusatsu genre, that's very popular with children in Japan and worldwide. When you're making an animated film, obviously this is going out worldwide as well, but for a more Western audience, how's it kind of adapting that genre to the animated film and staying true to kind of the roots, but this is a different thing.
Yeah. So for me, any story that I tell I have to connect with in a personal way. And I think the more personal the stories are, the broader of an audience they'll connect with. So again, because I approached it from the perspective of just telling a good story inspired by Ultraman, I wanted to tell a story about family, about the difficulties between parents and children. And no matter where you're from, that story rings true. Parents and children always have struggles. They learn from one another. They support one another. So that's the story inside of an Ultraman film. So the goal was always to make a film that would play to as many people possible because I knew that in this country Ultraman wasn't that big, and he was considered kind of a niche. So what if I could take that character and bring in families and bring in people that may never watch an Ultraman film? And that's what's been incredible about the reaction so far and the test audiences is that folks who think they would never want to watch an Ultraman film, parents, mothers, daughters, uh, dads who didn't know anything about it, kids who didn't know anything about it, they really connect with the characters. And I think it's because they can relate to the family aspect of it. So again, I think There are certainly things in there for Ultraman fans. Don't get me wrong. I'm a huge Ultraman fan. I have way too much Ultraman stuff in my house, way too many books. I watch the shows, Ultraman, Ultra Seven, Ace, Tiga, all of those shows. I've watched them so many times. But you don't want to you can never win on fan service. People are not going to be happy no matter what you do. But I hope that I can get to them emotionally and connect with them emotionally, and they're happy to see this story about parental conflict and reconciliation and love as told from the perspective of one of their favorite heroes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad that it's testing well with audiences that aren't familiar, because this did seem like a really great starting point, even if you're not familiar with the series. And you brought up fan service. I did have a question about that, because one of the kaiju we see, Gigantron, it's very similar to the kaiju Melba in Ultraman. Was there any ever thoughts of using like an existing kaiju in that role, or what? Why did we go like a slightly
Not
different?
Well, it was an original kaiju because it wasn't an Ultraman film at first, and so
Yeah.
I designed that character years ago, and I don't. I mean, maybe Melba was somewhere in the back of my head, but I honestly wasn't thinking about it when I created and designed Gigantron. And then, but you'll notice too, once it became an Ultraman film, I wanted to make sure that some of those characters got some play as well. So we have Bemular, uh, we have Naranga, just to name a couple of of my personal favorites that one can see in the show and see the history of the series. But Gigantron was an original, frankly, out of necessity because I couldn't use any of those creatures, and then there was no reason to change her. It was in the same way that it was no reason to change Ken Sato. And what's really great about the Ultraman series is that it's evolved and the rules change, and they're different characters every time. You have the core things of the science team being a big part of it, the kaiju and the Seijin or the aliens. Those are all parts of it, but the characters and their personalities change over time, and so I think it's why Ultraman is like ripe to be interpreted and to reimagine, because they literally reimagine it every couple of years.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. And I saw this really cool photo. It was like of an event in Japan, and they had made a Gigatron like suit for like a person was in the suit. It was like a tokusatsu suit for your creation. How cool is it seeing it kind of promoted to those fans, and it coming like full circle in that way?
It blew my mind. We didn't know they were building it, and so we flew out for Tubicon and to be on stage with Yamada Yuki, one of the stars of Godzilla Minus One, and the star of our Japanese language version of Ultraman Rising. And so we were overwhelmed by meeting him. We met members of the cast of the original series, which was incredible. Um, and then we come around a corner and you just see the suit there. And I couldn't believe it. Especially as somebody who's watched, uh, you know, uh, tokusatsu films for a long time in series. Of course, Godzilla, of course, War of the Gargantuas, like all these films. To see a suit of a character that I created and I designed was pretty mind blowing. And then to actually have it be walking around next to you on stage was, like I've said it many times, um, it's like I'm living my little boy dream when I was a kid. So
Yeah, that has to be really special. And I wanted to ask about your Ultraman Kinsato. There's a fun dynamic here. He's living this, double life. He's a baseball player, and then he also has this, duty to the world to protect it and be this, superhero as Ultraman. What did you like most about really exploring this kind of personal struggle and really showing the stress that comes with, all of his desires and being his own person?
Well, I always when you become a parent, um you're automatically juggling. You're juggling your career at home, you're juggling your responsibilities as a parent. any other responsibilities that you happen to have, any hobbies that you have, any interests that you have. Those things you have to learn how to balance it. And I think Ultraman is all about bringing balance to the world, but that's a grand idea. And to make something a bit more relatable and intimate, talk about a character who is feels like he's a bit of a loner. He doesn't talk with his father very much, and he was bullied when he moved from Japan to the United States. And how did he cope with that? Well, there's the line I wrote in the film where he says, if they're gonna talk anyway, you might as well give them something to talk about. So he's got this chip on his shoulder, and I wanted to show a character that needed room for growth. I think a lot of times characters, especially in family films, there's not as large of a growth with them. I think they're like, well, we got to like that guy. He's got to be lovable. And for me, I was like, no, the character just needs to be interesting. So I wanted to introduce him as we do in the film. Like first, there's him as a boy. Then you see how he's changed as an adult and what he presents to the public, and then what he presents in an interview, and then who he is when he comes home. And that's the true Ken. When he comes home, he's a guy who is dealing with the criticism of taking on this new role that he didn't want, of being Ultraman. He misses his mom, uh, who is gone and presumed dead. And just to show why he behaves the way he do, the way he does. I think that's what's important is you can have a character like that and have them be abrasive, but understand why they are who they are. And when Emmy comes into the picture, she is, I mean, in many ways, she's the real protagonist because she's the one who creates the most conflict for him and disrupts his life. And that friction, that positive friction, causes him to become a more selfless person, as happens often when you're a parent, because it's not just about you anymore. And he's forced in that situation, but he understands, or he comes to understand, that this is kind of what he is meant to do. So throughout the film, Ultraman is basically just a metaphor for being a parent and all the responsibilities that come with that, protecting the world, protecting your kids, sacrificing your own personal health and freedom to the service of others. So, which is, it's what my parents did for me. That's what I try and do for my daughter. And again, I think that's something that a lot of folks, especially parents, can relate to.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the abrasiveness and how rarely we kind of see that in animated films. We see it all the time in live action films, but yeah, it makes for an interesting protagonist here, especially when, you know, like you mentioned, he's very full of himself, very confident. He's wearing sunglasses in the club, which is very
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic to see, and I love the design of the baby kaiju. How is it just coming up with this very cute original creature, and talk me through kind of the design process for that?
So it's another one where I've been prepping things for different. We're going to be at Annecy next month, and so I've been prepping that doc. And so I dug back into my files to look at my first designs for Emmy, and she's really not much different. Proportions are the same, colors are the same, and it was, you wanted to present this kind of, uh if you look at babies, their heads are oversized, which gives a cute little waddle to them. So there's the design aspect of it. I think you'll probably see a little bit of Chuck Jones in the design, just because I can't help but have that influence there. But then her expressions are inspired by my daughter, by the children of the animators at ILM. In particular, there's a scene in the film, the before after, when Emmy is frightened because she only knows Ultraman, she doesn't know Ken, and so when he transforms back and forth, he has to help her to understand that Ultraman and Ken are the same person. And that first shift where she's crying and then she sees Ultraman, that big smile. I have 3 photos of my daughter where she had 3 extreme emotions in just seconds. And I sent that to the team and I was like, look at this, draw from your personal experience. You know how mercurial children are. So let's make sure that we invest that in her. And because she's a nonverbal character, we have to use her face. We use her bioluminescence. We use her movements to express the specificity of a kid. And one of the most rewarding things has been when coming out of screenings, even though it was based on my daughter, people are like, that's my son, that's my daughter, that's my niece, that's my nephew. And that just means the world to me because, again, being so specific causes something to be more relatable for a much wider audience. And when that happens, it's just magic.
That's a really cute story about the pictures of your daughter, and then the film looks great throughout. I love some of the effects, like when the baby kaiju has her like mouth beam that firing, like it looks incredible. How was it kind of just determining the look for Ultraman Rising?
So we wanted to, and there are some of Ultraman's powers that we drew, like Ultra Slash and things like that. I don't want to give too much away, but like things like that actually existed in the series. So we wanted to do our version of that and stay as true to that as possible while still, evolving it a bit. The example you gave of Emmy's blast, that was actually designed by a good friend of mine who's a traditional effects animator, uh, Dave Lee, and he did some early sketches for it, and then Hayden Jones and his team at ILM then translated it. In terms of the overall look, that was, we had hired Sunmin in early to do some freelance stuff even before she came in as art director, and she and our production designer Marcos Mateu worked really closely together. We knew, we always knew we wanted an illustrative style, and we were looking, of course, at manga and anime, but also if you look at like the rendered covers on manga, where it's a little bit more like beautifully rendered Copic markers, and Samin broke that down and then worked really closely with Hayden and the team there at ILM between London, Singapore, and Vancouver to come up with this look. And then it became, you look back at the first test that we did and it really looked incredible, but the look evolved from there. And once we had shots where it's like, that's what the movie looks like, then you just follow it consistently through there. So I hope I keep saying that, um, and I've said this to Phil Lord as well, is you guys and the success of Spider-Verse gave the rest of us permission to do the things we wanted to do for a long time. So like they really kind of pioneered, and because everybody in animation and CG like wanted to use more graphic looks, but there hadn't been a film that proved to be popular that had come out, or people were really scared of it, which I never understand why you'd be afraid of style. But it gave us support and being able to say, well, look how successful Into the Spider-Verse was. So, and how many people saw it, and then Across the Spider-Verse came out while we were working on the film to further kind of cement that, yeah, people love this. They like something that feels new and different. So, yeah.
Yeah, it looks great. Thank you so much for your time today and congrats on the film. I'd only seen Shin Ultraman prior to this, so this was a really cool to see this version of it as well. And as a relatively fresh-faced person, it totally landed. So congrats on the film.
Awesome, man. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Appreciate your
Awesome.
time.